Hello, good afternoon. Hello.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So, how many students in your batch?
So
Hello?
about 22.
22.
Yes.
But today is only 11 students are joining.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, how are you, all of you?
Fine, sir. And you?
Yes, I'm fine. Hello. ठीक आहे. सगळे घरी जायत व्यवस्थित सेफ मध्ये. हॅलो.
Yes, sir.
अच्छा. कौन कौन आले? तो अभिषेक पाटिल है, नदाफ है, नीलेश है, नागेश है, पूजा है, साधना है, सोती है. Okay. So today we'll start with the practice school. So I will take some part of the practice school of 3. That is a phytopharmaceutical, pharmacovigilance. Can you see the slide? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Slide
sir.
this day, no? Okay. So this
Oh, sir.
this day, hello. Slide this day, na? Hello.
Yes,
sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, sir, this day.
Okay. So this adverse event data collection. So what is the adverse event data collection? So why this data is required for in clinical, particularly in clinical trials, right? So this data is collected, and you can put into the data in appropriate way, right? So as you know this, in clinical trials, we know that different phases of the trials, maybe preclinical trials, in clinical trials, that is in clinical trials, again the 4 phases are there: the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, right? So every phase have the different healthy individuals as well as the patients can be used for the clinical studies. And the last is after this approval of that to collected all these data and sent to the IND department for approval. And after the approval, we can start your manufacturing, right? And this also the manufacture the products to market the product in the market, and then you can collecting the different marketing surveillance. So the last phase 4 is marketing surveillance. So you can collecting the different comments, different reaction over your products from the actual users, from the patient, from that the different chemists and customers, right? Then if any comments is a severe comment is there, or see it is any severe events are there, right? So that can be also check and modify your product also, right? If any reaction, if any serious comment of from the different patients, right, then that can be scrutinize all these events and modify your products as per the requirement of the patient, right? So these are the adverse event. So during his clinical trials,
Yes, sir.
so you can collecting that all these datas from the patient or maybe normal individuals, right? So collecting the data, that is a blood testing or maybe different body fluid testing, and collecting all the data, right? And this data is collected, right? And after this data is collected, that is called as a clinical data management. So as you know this, the clinical data management, right? This is a one of the branch in most of the company has been that the Tata Consulting Services is one of this, or Cognizant is one of this, or Synapse is one of this, right? So many companies which are doing the project on clinical data management, right? So whatever the clinical trials is doing on that patient or the various drug or the various new formulation, right? We can collecting the various datas, right? And this collecting the datas, we can after collecting the data, this data is will be integrated or a validation data, validate the data, and appropriate data we can publish, right? After this, the reviewing of that data is very important, right? So during these clinical trials, there is an investigator is when a responsible person to conduct the total clinical trials and collecting all this adverse event during the clinical trials, right? So as you know, this adverse event, right, these are the adverse reactions, or it is a adverse reactions, and these reactions will be collected in various ways, right? These data is which are again, if you are collecting these data, right, and this data is data collected which are sent to that sponsors, right? So different company which are conducted that clinical research or the clinical trials on the different drugs or different formulation. So that particularly it is called as a contract research organizations are there. Contract research organization. So this that type of organization only can be doing that research, or only can be conducted that clinical research, right? And collecting the various data from that clinical research, and this data should be put up into that the different ways, right? So you can, and after collecting data which are sent to that sponsors or maybe investigators, right? Or will be, we can apply the different statistical methods can be applied. So whatever the data is collected, it should be organized in a scientific way, right? So you can apply that different statistical methods is maybe ANOVA method, or maybe T square, maybe Y square, or maybe chi-square test. Different tests will be applied for that the data. An appropriate way to present the data with using that statistical methods can be using, right? So we'll see about this, right? So in conducting the clinical trials, conducted clinical trials to allow the safety and the efficacy data will be collected, right? So whether this drug is new drug is, or whether this new device is the safe or not, right? The safe or not will be predicted after conducting the clinical trials. So can collecting the data regarding, so whether your formulation is safe or not, whether is a formulation is give the efficacious effect or not. Understand it? So before you conducting the clinical trials, so whatever the protocol be designed, and this protocol be prepared and plan the protocol, right? And this protocol should be approved by ethical committee. As you know, the ethical committee is one of the committee in a clinical trials. So can handle all the ethics guidelines regarding to conduct the clinical trials, right? So this after that preparation of the protocol, and this protocol be approved by ethical committee, right? Then you start your clinical trials. Then clinical trials is managed by outsourced partner also, right? So if you do not have the facilities to conduct the clinical trials, if you do not have the big hospital, right, do not have all the facilities required for the clinical trials, so can find out the sponsors, right? Can find out the sponsors or contract research organization, so can manage all the clinical trials by CROs, right? So this measurements of the amount of studies maybe different data is collected, maybe study of the blood, or whether patient has health is good or not, what is status of the patient will be determined by collecting the data by in the various ways, by determining the different body fluids, right? Maybe blood or urine is there. This generally can be used for that. And collecting the various data, this data will be applied at different statistical testing methods, right? Then this is a way to conduct the clinical trials, right? So first thing is that to approve the protocol, right? This approve the protocol by the different organization, and particularly for the ethical committees are there or organization. So if you want to conduct the clinical trials, you can put up all these data and send to the data to that the is a particular organization, and that organization give the approval. The next process is investigator selection. So who will be conducting data? Who is the responsible person to conduct the data? So that is called as investigator, right? So he's wholly responsible for the clinical trials, that is called as the investigator. Then after selecting that investigator, then approval process. So different type of approvals we can take from the different governments, right? From the governments, from the different NGOs, or maybe different ethical committees or the regulatory guidelines. So all the approval will be taken. So before you conducting clinical trials, then after getting the approval, next is the patient recruitment and participation, right? You can, so what are the patient required, or the normal healthy individuals required, so can be recruited by for the clinical trials, right? And after recruiting that, next we can start the clinical trials and collecting all these data from the clinical trials. Then after this collecting the data, then you can put up the data, right, into that various database. This data is entered and reviewed, right? So first is entered in the various database and review that data. So whether the data is, whatever they entered your data, right? So whether it's correct or not, whether it's appropriate or not, whether it's the appropriate or not as per the ethical guidelines, right? So you can review that all the data, whatever they enter, then you can apply that different statistical analysis method. You can apply the ANOVA statistical methods. We can use in the different factorial design, right? Or you can use that the chi-square test or the student t-square square, right? These are the different tests we can be applied for that and put up the data in a presented way, right? Then next is a presentation and publication of the reports. So what are the data is coming, can prepare can present it in a different way. Can present to that in front of the sponsors or in front of the investigator, right? Or we can publish in the different reports. Publish that reports in a different bulletin, or maybe in a particular journals, right? And after can publish that the report in that. Then data file and registration obtained. So data is filed and the registration obtained. Then after this, if you know that whether your product is very safe and efficacious, then all this data is collected and which are sent to the data for approval of your products, right? Approval of the products, and then that is called as the registration of the product, right? This is the way of the clinical trials. Then the different teams which are involved in that clinical trials. So the first is clinical investigator are there, or with site coordinator are there, trial pharmacist are there, biostatistician is there, lab coordinator, project manager, clinical research manager, or monitor. So can monitor that the research, right? Ethical committee is there, regulatory affairs there, clinical data management is one of the committee in that. Then pharmacovigilance is there. The IT and ISO personnel are there. We can selecting the different patients or or the person required for to conducting the trials. There is IT and ISO personnel. Then clinical supplies. Then auditor and the compliance. What are the money is used for the clinical conducting the clinical trials, that should be audited. So all these expenses should be audited, and it should be compliance with as per the regulation which are mentioned by the government, right? So these are the different persons which are involved in that clinical trials, and each and every department, each and every person is very important for in a clinical trials. Then there is a clinical data, clinical trial data. So the clinical trial data is to collect that data, the integration of the data, and also whether the data is appropriately. And during this clinical trials, investigator to collecting the data from the patient's health, right, for a defined time period. So during that period, we can collect the data. So data is sent to the trial sponsors and analyze the data. So can apply the different statistical tool to present the data is a presented way, right? So these are the different steps involving to conducting the clinical trials. So it's the data designing. So means whatever the data is required during the clinical study is called as data designing. Then data collection, to collect the data from the various reports, various testing, right? And this is called as data collection. Then after collecting the data, there is a data entry into the database, right? Then after this entry, that is called as a data validation, right? Data validation. And next is the, after data validation, there is a data cleanup, right? After this, after that validation of the data, so you should, if you know that if any things are not be usable, anything is not beneficial, so can some of the data will be cleaned up also, or remove the data from that. It is called as cleanup. Then data analysis, right? Data reporting is one of this data reporting, and this last is the data coding, right? So some of this code is given, and as you know this, the medical coding is one of the aspects, right? So various data we can apply a different coding system, and this code will be applied. So any other person not be understand what is the language of that in a clinical trials, right? So these are one of the aspects of that clinical trial management. So why the clinical data management is required? So you can review the approval of the new drugs. Whatever the new drug is there, is depending upon the trust of the clinical trials. Whatever data is presented on a sufficient integrity, so can ensure the confidence in the result and conclusion. So always be that the data will be reviewed and approval, and should be will be improve the confidence in the result and conclusion. So if the data should be appropriate, then presented that data by the pharma company, right? So the trust will be added to the quality and standard. So the data will be collected, and should be maintain the quality and the standard of that the data also. So this maintenance of that the quality data and the standards, right? So the qualified person should be required, right? You should be trained person, you should be qualified person. So you can give the proper training to that the person those who handle that data, so can properly presented, properly use the statistical data, statistical methods to presented way, all right? And so the person should be trained as such that not be so can make the data should be quality and the standard, right? So this need for that CDM is a fine-tune way to cut the both the cost and the time for the clinical development. So can collecting the data as per such that we can reduce the time, right? You can reduce the cost of that, the therapy also, cost of the clinical trials. So the data should be collected as such that it should be accurate, it should be real time view, right? Then it is effectively use critical information, and it should be collaborative to assess the performance, right? And improve the control to enhance the visibility, and so all the data should be accountable, right? This is a need of data. Then the different members which are involved in that data management, and is a project manager, or also is called as a data manager. So we can responsible for to collecting the all type the data during the clinical trials. Then database administrator. So during the entry of that data into the database, right? So he is the responsible thing. Then data programmer, right, or data developer, database programmer or data developer. These are the one of the person we can many database can use for data entry, right? Then clinical data associate. So he is also responsible for to put up the data in a proper way into that the database, right? These are the responsibility of the clinical data management. So the first is the study setup, all right? Study setup. So during the connecting the clinical trials, so we have to first to prepare the protocol and approve that protocol. So the CRF is the case report file, right? The case report file, you can design and development of the case report file, all right? So means that the data will be presented in a hard copies, or maybe ERF. ECRF is maybe E is a ECRF. There is a case report file which are available in the soft copy. Understand it? So the database building and testing, right? So build up the data and to test that data whether this database is appropriate or not. Then needed the check preparations and the testing also. Then study conduct. During the study conduct, that is a data entry, collecting the data, then data should be entered into the database. Then you can see that any discrepancy in the management. Right. So if whatever the data is collected, if have the any data have the problem, any data have the discrepancy, you can find out that discrepancy and find out solution on that discrepancy. Understand it? Then data coding is one of this. Then you can apply the different coding system to the data. Can using that different coding softwares are there. Maybe using that made DRA or maybe WHO DDE directory dictionaries. All right, these are the different systems can be used for to give the coding. The data review on this ongoing quality control testing means that the data reviewing means that whether your data is collected is appropriate or not, whether it's correct or not. If anything is wrong, we can delete that data from that database. Then SAE is the reconciliation. SAE is that is a serious adverse event. So during this clinical trials, we can whatever the collected the data, if the data is how the serious adverse events are there, right? That also can be review that data. Then data transfer. So the data is transferred from one person to another person, or maybe one database to the another database, or the investigator to the sponsors. Right? This is called as data transferring. Then study closeout. Right? After conducting the studies, and if you have completion of the studies, then this data will be SAE is the serious adverse event reconciliation. So what are the serious event will be occurred during the clinical trials that will be considerable. Then quality control database lock, right? Then after this stopping your clinical trials and collecting all this data and reprocess the data, and then again due to the confidential things, though the data will not be used by the other way, right? So can that database will be locked, right, by that particular person. Then electronic archivals are there and the database transfer, right? So these are the aspects of this responsibility of the clinical data management, and this is one of the aspects. Then objective of the clinical trials. What is the objectives? To assess the efficacy and the safety. To assess efficacy and safety of the assess efficacy and safety of that study. So that study will be compared with the control and what are the other intervention, means other standard is available. So your study is compared with your control, and can compare. After comparing, we say that so whether your product is efficacious or not, whether is a safety or not will be resulted. Then all the trials which are exposed to the participant, so if having the highest risk of that participant, right? So the risk should not be much to the participant. So always be risk during the clinical trial should be minimized, right? So minimize. So you can ensure that both expected and expected risk can be identified. So during clinical trials, you can collected all this risk will be possible risk will be conducted. So what are the expected risk? What is the unexpected risk? Right, that will be easily identified and with the previously before you conducting the clinical trials. So note the instances of the harm or poor outcomes that. So during his clinical trials, what are this? Any poor outcome is there, whether during the study where your result is not appropriate, not right, that will be anticipated also. Then standard terminology which are used for identification of the different events will be occur during these clinical trials, or different events with these maybe adverse events are there, serious events are there, unexpected events are there, that all be identified with the standard terminology can be used. Then any so this what is mean by adverse event are there. So adverse events means that is unfavorable and unintended symptoms or sign which are including. All right. So during his conducting trials, whether is unfavorable or unintended symptoms will be occurred to the patient or not. If any sign of that the patient or not, so that is called as a adverse event of that. So this event should be recorded both the source of data and collecting the data, and then will be that data will be put up into that database. So this commonly medical notes are used. This is one of this. Then second form is used, that is a case report forms or adverse event log is there. So this data will be compiled and just put up into that the different database. Then these adverse events that as features are there, what is called as adverse event and what is the importance of that adverse event. Why it is what this adverse event is called as. So this with this adverse event, the result in the death of the person due to the life-threatening events, right? Due to the various serious adverse event, it may cause the death of the person, right? This is called as adverse event, serious adverse event. They require the long-term hospitalization. The person which are hospitalized very longly, right? So and due to that, the adverse events only. The result in the persistent or significant disability. If the person is disabled, right? Disabled in various ways, disabled to the hearing or disabled to talk, right? Disabled to the incapable to walk properly. This is called a disability, right? Then result in the congenital anomaly or the birth defects. Sometimes if I administer the different new drugs and with that new drugs, maybe chances different adverse event is possible, right? So maybe chances there is a if the particular drug which are administered to the pregnancy lady, it may cause that the birth defect of his baby or her baby, right? So this is one of the aspects. This is adverse event. Then serious adverse event should be reported as sponsor. So whatever the serious adverse event is occur, right? Just you can collecting that all these adverse events and it should be sent to that the sponsor within 24 hours, whether it's verbally or whether it's written, right? Because the sponsor is one of the responsible person when you conducting the clinical trials. So whatever this serious event is collected, that will be reported to the sponsors within immediately, right? The full report is follow the details of the outcomes and event. So the full report should be detailed outcomes. It should be there, and all the data should be included in that final reports. Then it should be recorded and documented case reports also there. So all these documents and all these records should be maintaining in the file and as per that adverse event records, right? So adverse events means that is an untoward medical occurrence associated with use of the drugs to the human, right? If you administer any drugs to that woman, so what are this? The adverse event of that possible, or the untoward medical occurrence which are occur, whether is unfavorable, whether is untended signs or the symptoms or the disease, shall temporarily occur if you are using the drugs to that patient, right? And that is called as adverse event. So adverse events may be analyzed due to use of the drug. And use of the drugs, there is a various type of drugs, maybe off-label drug. So those are maybe expired drugs. If you administered, it may be chances adverse of the action. Are using the different combination of the drug due to combination of drugs or concomitant type of drugs or combination of drug, it may chance it is some different reactions to the possible. They do if you have changed the route of administration, if you have changed the formulation, if you have changed the dose, or if you have changed the if you are overdosing to that the particular patient, right? So will be chances there is a adverse events are there, right? So there are different causing of that adverse event is possible. So these are the adverse event is indicate that change in the subject health of the status, right? After this drug administration to the patient, right? You can change the status of healthy status of that patient, right? Whatever the status of the patient is before, right, is not remaining the afterwards after this administer the drugs to that patient, right? So is a pre-existing condition that are ongoing during clinical trials. So condition may be occur. So before that pre-existing condition means before conducting the studies. So that patient having have that hypertension or not, whether this patient is diabetics or not, whether this person can taken the before any concomitant drugs or not, right? So whether this person can taken previously there's anticoagulant preparations or not, right? Whether this person which are administered before is a steroids or not. So that will be that will be see before you conducting that study. That this adverse events is a suspected adverse reaction is considered as a serious. Why it is serious? Serious is that with that events, right? So the person having the death, right? So inpatient hospitalization or the patient having the longer prolonged hospitalization is there, or persistent incapacity, persistent that inability of that person to conduct the normal life function, or is congenital abnormality or the birth defect is also possible. So that if the drug is administered to the pregnant lady, right, and maybe chances there is a birth defect of her baby. Right. Next, there is a life-threatening adverse event is also possible. So adverse experience of the adverse events is a view of the investigator is the immediate risk of the death. So this is called as a life-threatening adverse reactions. With that reaction, so the person may be death. Right. So there's a then one of this life-threatening adverse reaction is a hemorrhaging. Hemorrhaging is a internal bleeding with that internal bleeding, so the rapidly drop the blood pressure, and with that with that possible is a hypovolemic attack to the person. So what is a hypovolemic attack? Means that the volume of the blood which are very low in your body due to internal bleeding, due to the hemorrhaging, right? So loss of the blood. Loss of the blood, and due to the loss of the blood, it may chance is a rapid drop of the blood pressure. Then loss of the consciousness from the increasing pressure on the brain, right? Then substantial disruption of the person's abilities to conduct normal life function. So there may be chances inability of the person, maybe loss of the speech, or maybe person having the impetigo, or maybe loss of the memory, or maybe paralysis. These are the conditions of the person is unable to conduct his normal life. Right. So these are the life-threatening events may be possible. Then exposure to the medical products resulting the adverse outcome in the child. So during pregnancy, so is one of the example is a thalidomide the case. So this is a very popular case and very so in histological cases there. So they due to the thalidomide, right, to the pregnant ladies, right. So the birth of the babies is abnormal, or the deformed arms and the legs, and that is called as a thalidomide things are thalidomide theory is there. The important medical events is may not result in the death. So it's maybe life-threatening or maybe required hospitalization, right? So this is the serious event is possible with that and like that. Then one of this serious event is called as allergic bronchoplasma. PRAS is a required intensive treatment of emergency room or that home. Or is also is called as a blood dyscrasis. So blood dyscrasis is due to this imbalance in the body fluids, right? Then convulsions, the development of the drug dependency, or unexpected adverse events may be hepatic necrosis, or maybe cerebral thromboembolism, right? So the cerebral thromboembolism means to formation of the different clots in a body in a different organs and during circulation, and will be cerebral vascularities when there is a narrowing of or the thickening of the vessels, and due to the thickening of the vessels will be changing the blood flow, right? And these are due to changing the blood flow to increase the blood pressure and maybe causing the any congestive heart failure also. So these are the different reasons to causing the serious event may be possible of that. Then so different events having the different grades are given. So grading severity and the intensity of the ranges, right? These are the 5 grades are there. So each grade having that different symptoms will be occurred to the patient if the patient having given that new drugs or the new formulation to that patient. So grade 1 is asymptomatic or mild symptoms if the drug is administered, and if any only the mild symptoms will be occur during is the clinical or diagnosis observation. So no any intervention indicated. So very mild effect, very mild symptoms will occur, and that category is called as a grade 1. Then grade 2 is a moderate type of the symptoms may be occur. So very minimal type of the symptoms will occur, right, with the local and non-invasive interventions. Then grade 3 is a severe, the very severe interventions are may be possible. Severe adverse event is possible, may be severe or medically significant, but not immediately life-threatening. It is severe, but it is not be causing any death of the person, right? Or the hospitalization or the prolonged hospitalization will be indicated. So in that case, so will be the patient should be hospitalized in locally and to treat that disease, right? So this grade 3 is a severe and medically significant, but not be life-threatening. Then grade 4 is a life-threatening and urgent interventions would be required. So urgent hospitalization must be required, urgent treatments must be required to that patient, right? And that is called as a grade 4. Then grade 5 is the last stage, is a death related with the adverse event. Right, so immediate death of the person due to that adverse event is possible. Then adverse event, so this all these adverse events will be collected the data, and this data will be collected during the course of studies. The CRC is the those who are conducting that clinical trials, right? So this is a CRC is Committee of the Regulation Act is called as CRC. So find them in the medical records. So can collected all these events, adverse events from the different reports from that. He can collected all these data from the different reports, maybe medical reports, or maybe laboratory reports, or radiological reports, or the surgical reports, infusion center or nursing reports, notes order, and the subject diaries, or the subject surveys, or the questionnaires. So this all these sources we can obtain the data by the CRC person, right? Then documentation of the adverse event should be written and the sign of the qualified person, right? So what are the documented evidence of the adverse events will be documented well, written well on the paper, and signed on that paper by the qualified clinicians. Then a need of the PI is a principal investigator of that conducting the clinical trials. We can show to show the review of the study. So that study, whatever the adverse event is occur, that should be sent to that PI. PI is a principal investigator to conducting the clinical trials. Then non-serious and the serious adverse event will be again this will be sent to that the PI. Unanticipated events, the report to the all directed observed events, whether is a skin rash is there, whether is a nausea is there, what the vomiting is there, right? So these are the simple reaction you can observe that can be also can reported to that. Just you can observe things to the patient, and what you observe you can just put up into that data. Then events spontaneously volunteered by the subject. So what is the spontaneous? The event spontaneous means which may causing the death of that person also. There's event spontaneous, anything happen to that the patient. Then CRC role is the advanced repeat collection. The main role of the CRC is to collect that adverse event, right? Collect that adverse event and this review the data entry for adverse event. Then we can then the sponsor investigator develop the this data entry. After reviewing the data, this data is sent to the sponsor or investigator. Then he can give the permission for data entry. Then all the adverse events and suspected adverse reactions will be collected from the different sources of the documentation, from the medical history, from the different reports, and we can prepare that CRC. Those CRC responsible for to prepare that abstract of the events, right? Prepare that abstract of the events. What are the possible events? Prepare that abstract in a short way, in a short notes type. Then documentation can be written within the medical records. Right. At the time of the CRC will take the information from the family friends. So if information is not be collected with that reports, that report that is information will be collected from the family members and the friends also, and that data also can be collected and also can be put up in your data. The report of the all serious adverse events immediately, and which are sent to can inform that principal investigator. These are serious events are there, and So we have to find out some solution on that serious event. So the first we can prepare the reports and send to that principal investigator. Then CRC must be collect and enter the safety and the accuracy of that. Then documentation of the subject baseline medical history, from that documentation from the physical examination, from medication, from the treatments, right? So all this data is collected from that documentation. Then evaluate that data, whether this safe or not, whether adverse event during the period is there, all this data is collected and which are maintained. The CRS is responsible for abstracting the tracking of the adverse events. Prepared after the data is collected. So the CRS is responsible for collecting and as well as abstracting the data in a simple way, in a short way. And this event, this adverse event of the short data is sent to the principal investigator before entering to the Poinsettia's database. So before entering to the database, so that should be sent to the principal investigator. Then after scrutinized by that data by the principal investigator, then he can give the permission about this, the put up into that the database. Then understand the protocol specific adverse events. Like this is a specific adverse events. It is a different protocol to protocol adverse events may be possible. If the different drugs have the different adverse event is possible. So every drug will be collecting all this data. The database designing, this is one of the aspects. So in database designing, data from the clinical trials will be collected and stored to the CDMS. CDMS is a clinical data management system. Collection of the raw data and can view the data and find the data. Then the DBSM, the DBSM is database management system. So can use the MS Access, so can use the MS Excel or Oracle Clinical or the clinical trials or the phase forward inform or Medidata Rev. These are the different database which are used to enter the data into that database. And the next last slide is that is a data management workflow. If you are collecting the data and then reprocess the data, right? First part is the receipt of the clinical research form. Is called as a case report form, right? Can prepare that case report form. This case report form is containing all the information of that adverse event, and then can first entry into that database, then second entry to the database, then clinical data management and validation of that batch validation of the particular data man. This data will be processing with the auto coding. This is called as auto coding. Can code the data so the normal person not be understand the data, whatever the data is there. Then any discrepancies of the data, right? Any discrepancy of the data will be put will be find out some solution on that discrepancy and to reframe the data again if having that discrepancy in that the data. Then data clarification form is there. So whether data is accurate or not, whether is correct or not, right? You can fill up the data by the principal investigator and sign on that the principal investigator. Then this DCF resolution. DCF resolution is data clarification form is there, and if any that form is will be resolved, and there is a final form is there. Then AC is the safety adverse event reconciliation, then quality control plan, and the last is the database log. So this last the thing is there, activity is there, database log. So after completion of that completion of this total study, right, and after that this data will be locked into that database, right? So no other person can be open that data and not be reuse of that data, right? And this called as there's a database log. Then electronic archivals are there. So this is about the clinical data management and how to collecting the data and put up into the data in a different database and how to enter that data. So that will be see afterwards. Okay. Hello.
Thank you, sir.
Hello. Okay. Last. How many students are there? Total 19.
19.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the first lecture and just collection of the data, and next lecture we will see that is what is a data entry. how can do the data entry. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You can leave the room.
Attendance, sir.
So I have already collected the attendance.